We're all familiar with the classic symptoms of a midlife crisis. Buying a sports car, running a half marathon, having an affair, starting a YouTube channel, stuff like that. But lately, as I trudge my way towards midlife myself, I've been thinking a lot about its underlying causes, its essence, and whether or not philosophy can help us to deal with it. And by us, I mean me. And according to some recent work by philosopher Kieran Setiya, the main culprit might be an obsession with goal-centered thinking. This is Frank Philosophy, and today we'll be speaking frankly about the midlife crisis. So what is the midlife crisis? Well, the term comes from a 1965 essay called Death and the Midlife Crisis by psychologist Elliot Jacques. And Jacques' definition of the midlife crisis is coming face to face with one's own mortality in the prime of one's life. Basically, this just means coming to grips with the fact that our lives will end, no matter how great things might be going at the moment. And Jacques came to this conclusion by looking at a not-so-random selection of 300 or so artistic figures, each of whom went through some period of crisis in their artistic prime, when they were most productive. So Jacques' methods are definitely questionable. They're not exactly scientific in the way that 21st century empirical psychology would like them to be, but it was a good first step, and the name stuck. And he seemed to identify that there is something that happens to us around midlife as we relate to our own mortality in a way that we haven't before. Now, recent empirical evidence on the midlife crisis is a bit more controversial. Longitudinal studies, which trace one's subjective reporting of their own well-being or happiness throughout their lives, show a consistently upwards trend. People's lives seem to just get better and better as they get older. Only about 10 to 20% report a midlife dip. Cross-sectional studies show a different result. These studies just focus on a single point in a person's life and ask them to report, how they're doing. And these studies show a consistent drop in people's subjective reporting of their own well-being in their late 30s and early 40s. Psychologists call this the U-shaped curve, or the aging paradox. So it might not be a universal feature of the human experience if we pay attention to longitudinal studies, but 10 to 20% still isn't nothing. So there seems to be something going on with at least a portion of the population when they hit their late 30s and early 40s. So we might want to ask about what typically happens at this point in people's lives that might lead a portion of them to report widespread dissatisfaction. In other words, what else is happening in midlife that might lead to a crisis and then in turn to erratic and out-of-character behavior that we typically associate with midlife crises? Well, at least two things seem to happen. And the first, I think Jacques may have been right about. We do seem to have a different relationship with our own mortality when we reach this age. In our 20s, we feel invincible. When we're children, we feel invincible. But by the time we're in our mid to late 30s, a lot of things have happened to us. We've lived long enough to see the progression of time and to see its potentially devastating effects. We might start waking up with unexplainable pains. Maybe we can't run as fast as we used to. Injuries might take longer to heal. We've watched our parents grow old. Maybe we've lost a friend or two, or a pet. We've seen babies turn into children. We've seen the devastating effects of the slow march of time. And we could feel it in ways that we weren't able to before. And this in itself may lead to the realization that, we don't have infinite time left. There's a set limit to the number of years we can expect, and the end isn't all that far off. And this might lead us to start asking questions like, how have I spent my life so far, and how am I going to spend the rest of it? We might even entertain the possibility that we've wasted big portions of our lives, or we've made major mistakes in the past that we need to work to rectify in the future. And this idea that we really need to think more carefully about how we spend our time, because we might not have a crazy amount left, is maybe the first step towards an existential crisis that could lead to some of the symptoms that we see people exhibit in midlife. So Jacques may have been at least partly right. But another thing starts to happen around midlife that might even be more important. Basically, the nature of our personal projects and goals begins to radically transform. When we're younger, all of our goals and projects feel big. They feel life-defining. We need to graduate high school so we can get into college, and graduate college so we can get a good job, and get that job so we can become financially independent and maybe start a family. And then we need to buy our first home, and then we need to get that first big promotion, and so on and so forth. In fact, our whole nexus of motivation is centered around these giant goals that lead sequentially from one to the next. But as we reach our mid to late 30s, we start running out of these kinds of projects. We've either accomplished our goals or we give up on them. They're either in the past or permanently out of reach. All the major moves have already been made. And instead, our goals become smaller. They become repetitive, a bit more routine, maybe even redundant, boring. They become maintenance. We need to accomplish things so we can keep what we have already, not so we can make the next big move. We might not even have a next big move lined up anymore, and that's a scary thought. So if we combine the feeling of our own mortality, ever so slowly creeping into our lives, and the impending redundancy of life from here on out, well, we have the makings of an existential crisis. We have limited time for limited activities with limited impact on the quality of our lives. All the big moves in our lives have already been made. The table is set. And that's a scary prospect even if we're living our dreams. Even if the activities that we have to do from here on out are ones that we chose and ones we've been working for all throughout our 20s and 30s. And this is why it's such a common solution to the midlife crisis to do something so crazy and out of character. This is why people have a career change, or start a major new project, or make a giant new purchase, or have an affair. These are all just ways of rebelling against the regularness of life. We need to set newer and bigger goals like we used to have. And the results, well, they vary. Some people end up doing very well, and they do set new goals for themselves, and they're very happy about it, and that's fine. But the idea that we need to combat the midlife crisis by setting newer and bigger goals might just be missing the point. At least that's the argument made by philosopher Kieran in a recent article and a recent book on the midlife crisis. So in his paper on the midlife crisis, Setiya notices our tendency to try and solve it by setting newer and better goals. But the problem is this doesn't work, because no matter what goal we set for ourselves, we can always ask what happens next. We can always ask what happens once we've actually accomplished our goal. And the answer is always the same. It goes away. No matter what goal we set for ourselves, it goes away as soon as we accomplish it. And when it goes away, we have to find a new one, and so on indefinitely. And Setiya thinks that this whole structure of goal-focused living is just a recipe for existential burnout. So the problem isn't that we have the wrong goals, or even that we've run out of goals, but that we're obsessed with having the right goals. That's the recipe for the existential crisis known as the midlife crisis. And to make his point, Setiya introduces a distinction between what he calls telic activities and atelic activities. Telic activities are those who have their success conditions built in. They have natural endpoints. When we complete the activity, it's successfully done and eliminated from our lives. Think about running a marathon. What's the success condition for running a marathon? Well, it's getting to the finish line. And once you get to the finish line, the marathon is over. It's done. The box is ticked. The goal disappears. And this structure remains no matter how major or important the goal might be. It just vanishes as soon as it's completed. That's just how goals work. But atelic activities, on the other hand, don't have a natural endpoint. Instead, their success condition is just doing the act itself. The value of an atelic activity comes from the act itself. A good example is going for a walk. What's the success condition for going for a walk? Well, it's walking at all, anywhere, for however long. It doesn't matter. As long as you are on the walk, you are successfully going for the walk. That's its success condition. It's built into the act itself, and that's where the value comes from. And Setiya says that one way of maybe mitigating the midlife crisis is to focus on atelic activities rather than telic ones. Because for many of us, the goals that used to drive our lives when we were younger are just gone, and they're never coming back. And any attempt to replicate the magnitude of those goals is just going to fail. I mean, it might not, but it's also a risk that we might not have to take. Instead, we could focus more on activities that are fulfilling and meaningful but don't fit into a goal-centered structure. Or even if activities do have goals associated with them, we should make sure that they're activities that we still enjoy in the moment when we're doing them, regardless of whether we accomplish that goal. In other words, finding an engaging hobby that we can really get into, no matter what the outcome might be, is a good way of dealing with the midlife crisis. An example that comes to mind for me is fishing, one of the quintessential midlife hobbies. Why is fishing so valuable to the people who do it? Well, because the people who love fishing enjoy it and endure it regardless of whether they catch anything. People who love to fish, and if you know any, then you know what I'm talking about, they'll spend hours and days and tens of thousands of dollars on boats and gears and trips and bait and God knows what else, all in the hopes of catching a fish. And people who love to fish will go even if they know they might not catch anything. They'll go to the same spot even if they didn't catch anything the day before. They'll go fishing even if they know that catching a fish is unlikely. And this is because the joy that they derive from fishing comes from the act of fishing itself, not from whether or not they catch anything. Of course, it is the goal of fishing to catch fish. That's what it means, I guess. But the joy that comes from fishing itself isn't necessarily determined by the size of the fish that one catches or whether or not one catches any fish at all. Instead, the success condition for fishing is the act itself. Another good example is cooking. People who love cooking don't measure their success by the number of meals cooked. They just love to cook. They love the act of cooking itself. The payoff comes from the act of putting the ingredients together and cooking them and sharing them with others. That whole entire experience is worth doing from a lover of cooking's point of view. They derive joy, meaning, and satisfaction from the act itself. And so again, catching fish and serving meals might ostensibly be the goals, and there's a sense in which they're telic activities, but we can reframe these activities and focus on the joy that gets derived from the act itself. And this can lead to more enduring satisfaction and lessen our obsession with goal-focused thinking. Of course, we still need goals. I mean, bills need paying and projects need finishing. Goals are important. But if we reframe things and focus less on the goals and more on the joy of the pursuit of those goals, or not even the pursuit of those goals, the joys of the journey itself wherever the goals may be, however successfully or not we may achieve them, we can shift our attention to the lived experience rather than to the outcome of whatever it is we're doing. And this might help to blunt the force of the existential crisis that so many of us encounter as we reach midlife. So the midlife crisis happens when we feel our own mortality, and at the same time life feels redundant, monotonous, and limited, regardless of how well things may be going. So instead of finding new crazy goals to reignite the spark that used to drive us when we were younger, just do more things that you can enjoy without a fixed goal. Abandon the whole life-defining milestone system. Eventually, it'll wear out, and it'll wear you out in the process. Exercise for the joy of doing so, rather than to hit a weight or fitness goal that might just increase your anxiety. Try to enjoy work while you're doing it, instead of just thinking about ticking the next box or getting the next paycheck. If possible. I know it's hard. In other words, if there's any joy to be found in what you're doing, just try to enjoy actually doing it. Of course, this doesn't magically solve anything, but it does tend to loosen the grip of the endless anxiety of what's coming next and where am I going with this? We don't need to define ourselves by our goals. And when we give up this illusion that we have to, we may end up more productive, happier, more satisfied, and less prone to existential dread. But what do you think about the midlife crisis? Does anything that I've said here resonate with you in any way, or am I just talking to myself here? That's entirely possible. But at any rate, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you learned something, be sure to like and subscribe for more Frank Philosophy.